Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Wilmette Institute's 5th webinar in a series called God Summons Europe. And today the webinar topic is Baha'u'llah's tablet to Queen Victoria. Previously, we have done webinars about Baha'u'llah's first tablet to Napoleon III. We've done 2 webinars on Baha'u'llah's second tablet to Napoleon III, and the previous 4th webinar was Baha'u'llah's tablet to Tsar Alexander II. And so today we are delighted to hear Shahrokh Monjazeb presenting about Baha'u'llah's tablet to Queen Victoria. Take it away, Shahrokh.
Thank you, Dr. Stockman. Friends, welcome. This is the 5th or part 5 of the God Summons Europe part 1, since we're going to be having a part 2 later this year. But this is going to be the last of these 3 major monarchs where Baha'u'llah has addressed, namely Napoleon III, Tsar Alexander II, and Queen Victoria. A lot of people know there's a lot of information about Queen Victoria. She's a very well-known monarch. She was the longest reigning monarch till recent times, where Queen Elizabeth II has reigned now longer than hers reign, but she had quite a long reign and essentially dominated the majority of the 19th century. And we will see that even her progenies were part of the makeup, the political makeup and the ruling makeup of Europe as well. Now, looking at UK or Britain in the mid-19th century, to set the background of how we analyze and we look at, in contrast to some of the other nations, going back to the revolutions of 1848, during the European revolutions of 1848, only 2 countries in Europe were not seriously impacted by those sweeping populist uprisings. These 2 nations were namely Great Britain and Russia. Now, in Russia, an unrelenting policy of political repression under the Tsar, which was Nicholas I, had managed to bring under control any and all popular movements. In Britain, however, the institutions of representative government gave those men who may have had revolutionary ideas the hope of accomplishing their purpose through lawful means. So the system of government that Britain had, which was constitutional monarchy, was quite different than the totalitarian regimes that were essentially ruling, where the king was the supreme ruler in other parts, and even nations that were seeking democracy and republicanism, like France, were eventually transformed into imperial rule. So the only nation that had true democracy, if you will, for greater part of the 19th century was really Britain. Now, and we will see that Baha'u'llah applauds that, and it's a system that seems that God likes constitutional monarchy, from a point of view of how it's going to work, how it's politically is a sound instrument of governance. Now, learning from the continental lessons of 1848 revolutions, the British entered the 1850s more determined to solve their national problems by reform legislation enacted by a parliament that by mid-1880s represented all the adult males in the country. Obviously, the female representation only broke out in the turn of the 20th century with suffragette movements. But even in the 19th century, there were not full representation. So democracy was still, in process. But you will see that it finally reached its height, if you will, with male representation, full male representation in the second half of the 19th century. Now, a watershed moment for Britain in the mid 19th century was the year 1851. And it was not really a political thing. It was actually a exposition thing. It was something that Britain showed the world how advanced it was and why it was the greatest nation on earth, so to speak. In this year, Britain opened an international exhibition in the newly built London's Crystal Palace. They had built this, gigantic and unprecedented glass house, if you will, to house the exposition underneath it. Because of the rain and everything else, obviously they wanted to keep the participants dry. So it was a brilliant idea, and it was absolutely a massive thing that they built, which was all glass, and it was truly one of the wonders of the Industrial Revolution. It was dubbed the Crystal Palace. It was Great Britain's opportunity to parade before an admiring world its prosperity and material achievements. And one of the key figures who was really instrumental in this exposition was the Prince Consort of Queen Victoria, Prince Albert, who was very much driven to promote the English way of life and the new technologies and so on and so forth. And Britain was leading, in inventions and advancements throughout the 19th century. There were other nations, obviously Germany, later on Germany and France were also advancing, but Britain really had the upper hand from that point of view. So the Great Expo of 1851 reflected a national feeling of satisfaction with the present and confidence in the future. It also exuded a belief among the British people that given enough time, all problems affecting human life and society could be solved by human reason. Now, another important point, as far as colonialism, Britain was probably at the leading edge of that. This old saying that they had, that the sun never sets on the British Empire, because it had Commonwealth territories, if you will, in as far places as New Zealand and Australia. It had British India, and other regions within, Asia as well, and Middle East, all the way. So, and in Africa as well. South Africa as being one of the major footholds of Britain in the 19th century as well. So it truly was a great nation and very powerful, perhaps the most powerful and most influential nation on earth in the middle of the 19th century. Now, the symbol of this confident and hopeful mood was none other than the British monarch, Queen Victoria, who ruled Britain and its vast colonies for 64 years. She came to power at the age of 18. That's right. So she was born in 1819, and she was crowned the queen at 1837. So that she would have been 18 years of age at the time, and then she ruled. Her monarchy lasted till her passing in 1901. In fact, her crown prince was quite an old man by the time he became King Edward. So, you know, she certainly did rule and was very influential through her family, as well as we will see. Many of her children were married to future monarchs of Europe, and later rulers of Europe were related, including the Tsar Nicholas II, Emperor Wilhelm II as well. They were grandchildren of Queen Victoria. So she certainly had influence, not only through the power of the British rule, but through her family as well, and the unions that were made through the marriages and the progenies of the ruling class of Europe. As the prominent historian Professor Norman Rich writes, with her, Queen Victoria's strong sense of moral respectability, her national pride and self-satisfaction, she represented to a remarkable degree the values and attitudes of her countrymen and of an age that has appropriately been named after her, the Victorian era. So British politics after 1850 must be viewed against this background of national prosperity and optimism. And it also gave the British a degree of arrogance as well, that should be said, and kind of an imperial arrogance that, you know, they knew what was going on. They were the most stable nation. There was really no revolutionary ideas. I mean, all the changes or political differences was resolved through parliamentary means, and as such, you know, there was never a threat of the monarchy and the rule and the governance, the infrastructure of the governance of UK to be undermined or to collapse. So this kind of gave the British this degree of arrogance and imperialism that, you know, through their model, the world could live in prosperity. But obviously there were many who opposed that, and we will see that particularly later on with the British India as well, and their independence in the 20th century. Now, Baha'u'llah wrote his summons to Queen Victoria around the same time as his second tablet to Napoleon III. We don't know, again, the exact dates, but you know, we know that it would have been sometime in the early weeks or months of 1869. I believe that when Baha'u'llah began to reveal these individual proclamatory letters, I think they were done in batches, meaning that they were done, you know, around the same time, within days and weeks of each other, if you will. Now, at the time of the revelation of the tablet to Queen Victoria, Baha'u'llah was in solitary confinement at the army barracks. So it was a very difficult time. So we have to bear that in mind as we read the tablet. Baha'u'llah's tablet to Queen Victoria is revealed entirely in Arabic, to look at some of the external features of it. The authorized Baha'i English translation of this tablet is published in the Summons of the Lord of Hosts from pages 88 to 96, and has been divided into 15 paragraphs. Now, a great portion of this tablet, I think the majority of it, definitely more than the tablet to the Tsar, has been translated by the beloved guardian. So paragraphs 1 through 6 is all Shoghi Effendi's translation. Paragraph 8, paragraph 11, and paragraph 15 are all inclusively are the guardian's rendering into English, which he included in several works. Promised Days Come, it's also in the Gleanings from the Writings of Baha'u'llah. Now, since Baha'u'llah quoted uh, large sections of these tablets, tablet to Napoleon III, the Tsar, as well as the tablet to Queen Victoria, in his epistle to the Son of the Wolf, as he was addressing Sheikh Mohammed Taghi Najafi. There is large sections of that when the Guardian translated the epistle to the Son of the Wolf, he also translated those sections. But as you will see, there's some minor changes, if you will, that Baha'u'llah has made to that. So in some ways, they could be considered as re-revelation, but I think they're more editorial, divine editorial, if you will, to enhance the scope, as we will see, of these tablets. So only sections of paragraphs 7 and 12 and all of paragraphs 13 and 14 are authorized Baha'i translations made by the Baha'i World Center, which completed the tablet. So again, the tablet begins in Arabic, Ya ayyatuha al-malaka, malakatu fil London, isma'i نداء ربك مالك البرية من الصدرة الإلهية إنه لا إله إلا أنا العزيز الحكيم. So this section has been translated, the first 6 paragraphs, as we said. So it begins, O Queen in London, incline thine ear unto the voice of thy Lord, the Lord of all mankind, calling from the divine loach tree. Verily, there is no God. Verily, no God is there but me, the Almighty, the All-Wise. So the language is a first-person proclamatory language here, where it's right off the bat, it conjures that sense and the feeling that this is a divine proclamation, and this is God speaking to his vassal, namely the Queen and the monarch of the British Empire. Baha'u'llah continues, cast away all that is on earth and attire the head of thy kingdom with the crown of remembrance of thy Lord, the all-glorious. He in truth hath come unto the world in his most great glory. And all that hath been mentioned in the gospel hath been fulfilled. The land of Syria hath been honored by the footsteps of its Lord, the Lord of all men, and north and south are both inebriated with the wine of his presence. Blessed is the man that hath inhaled the fragrance of the most merciful and turned unto the dawning place of his beauty in this resplendent dawn. The mosque of Aqsa vibrateth through the breezes of its Lord, the all-glorious, whilst Batha trembleth at the voice of God, the exalted, the most high. Whereupon every single stone of them celebrateth the praise of the Lord through this great name. Now, this reference, this is Islamic reference, the Mosque of Al-Aqsa Mosque, and Qubbat al-Sakhara, the Dome of the Rock, are the two sacred sites for Muslims throughout the world, next to Mecca and Medina, basically the Kaaba in Mecca, and then the places associated with Prophet Muhammad in Medina. Then you have in current day Israel, if you will, right now, you have in Jerusalem, the two mosques that are side by side, and today you can go. So Mosque of Al-Aqsa is now in this case, there is a mosque that is called Al-Aqsa Mosque today, but the Mosque of Aqsa here, Baha'u'llah is referring to these two. It's basically the Dome of the Rock and the Aqsa Mosque together, because they used to be formed, and they generally refer to as the third most holy site, in the world for Muslims. But they're twin, so even though it's referred in the writings here as the Mosque of Aqsa, but they were basically together. They're essentially are mentioned together in the writings. Whenever there's a reference to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, is to the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, Qubbat al-Sahara, and then the reference Batha is to Mecca, and that region, basically Mecca and Medina, Baha'u'llah continues, lay aside thy desire and set then thine heart towards thy Lord, the Ancient of Days. We make mention of thee for the sake of God and desire that thy name may be exalted through thy remembrance of God, the creator of earth and heaven. He verily is witness unto that which I say. We have been informed, this is now Baha'u'llah gets into some of the contemporary events at the time that was happening, and some important watershed and milestone events in the history of Britain and the history of the world. So here Baha'u'llah says, we have been informed that thou hast forbidden the trading in slaves, both men and women. This verily is what God hath enjoined in this wondrous revelation. God hath truly destined a reward for thee because of this. Now, I should mention that slavery was abolished throughout most of the British Empire by the Slavery Abolition Act of 1833, 4 years before Queen Victoria officially came to power. However, there were certain exceptions in the act, and particularly the British East India Company was exempt, which included Ceylon, which is also today known as Sri Lanka. So that part of the subcontinent of India was exempt from slavery. And that revision to that part of the act, which was really the final phase of the Abolition Act, that eliminated all the exceptions stipulated in the original Act of 1833, was ratified by the British Parliament in 1843 during Queen Victoria's reign. Now, I also want to make a comment. I know my dear friend, Dr. Nader Saidi, had spoken about a reaction of Baha'u'llah and a prayer of Baha'u'llah in the late 1830s about Baha'u'llah releasing and emancipating some of his own household slaves that were from the family of his father, essentially. And I think there were somewhat of a claim that this was unique and well, certainly was unique in Iran and in that region, but it was not the first act of slavery, abolition of slavery in the world. The British began an abolitionist movement prior to anyone, and you can read the history of it. One of the members of parliament who's very famous was William Wilberforce, that worked very hard since the late 1700s, so in the 18th century, to bring about the abolition of slavery within the British Empire. And in fact, on the year 1833, I think few months after his death, his passing, William Wilberforce, there were many, but he was one of the key figures in the Parliament that pushed for the Slavery Abolition Act. But it took several decades for it to come to its full realization, and it was, and the British Parliament was very divided, and I think the movies have been made about it as well, and there's certainly documentaries about this. So 1833 really was the beginning, meaning that in the British Empire, which was the largest of the colonial empires in the world, there was to be no trading of slave, and slavery was essentially abolished. Now, this happened in phases in actuality. So it was the law, but obviously it took a while for it to be fully enforced, if you will. And I think the early 1840s, 1843, a year before the declaration of the Bab, and having the Abolition Act being complete in its scope within the British Empire. So there were, and as you know, this continued in the United States till the American Civil War and the 13th Amendment as well after. So certainly this whole impetus, the momentum for abolition of slavery was something that began in the United Kingdom, and then it spread throughout the world. And I think the next major nation that adopted it was the United States after, and promoted it on an international level, made outlawing it and not allowing it. And I think you see that there's actually a movie by Steven Spielberg about this. It's called Amistad, which this is prior to the American abolition enactment of the slavery. So it was, I think, in the 1830s or early 1830s that happened, which created a political situation. But anyway, so just wanted to kind of give you a little bit of what things were happening. And I believe Baha'u'llah certainly, knew that slavery was something that was abhorrent to God. And so this is still prior to even the revelation of the Bab, that Baha'u'llah began through his own example, through his own household. So that truly is remarkable and unprecedented, even in the history of, I would say, Middle East, if you will, because there were slavery in the Middle East at the time. But it was not unique in the sense that Baha'u'llah did not initiate something. I personally believe that because of the Abolition Act, it kind of created a precedent that Baha'u'llah wanted to show the community of the Middle East that they should follow the good act that the British and other nations have set in motion. And here you will see that his encouragement and endorsement and applauding this act of abolition of slavery is something that certainly is part of his revelation, but it's something that he feels that that Britain, who had taken charge and had initiated this, should be applauded for. So here, as you can see, that Baha'u'llah says that because of this. Now, she directly did not do this because this was a constitutional monarchy. She was essentially a figurehead, but because she represented the government of Britain, obviously Baha'u'llah is applauding her government, because even the terminology that was used and still is being used in the British parliamentary system, in this constitutional monarchy, that the government that is headed by the political side of it, that is headed by the prime minister, it's called Her Majesty's or His Majesty's government. Okay, so there's still, the queen is the symbol, but ultimately she has to sign and give it royal assent. So giving that royal assent basically is the final confirmation. So she would have had to have signed the Abolition Act or the revisions to it, or any of the other political to ratifications that was done by the parliament. Finally, she would have to kind of rubber stamp it and sign it into law. So that was the last step, and I believe still today is in the British system, that is the case. So because of this, Baha'u'llah says, He, God, verily will pay the doer of good his due recompense, were thou to follow what hath been sent unto thee by him who is the all-knowing, the all-informed. As to him who turneth aside and swelleth with pride, after the clear tokens have come unto him from the revealer of signs, his work shall God bring to naught. As he did with Napoleon III and other monarchs who turned away from God's command and summons. He, in truth, hath power over all things. Man's actions are acceptable after his having recognized the manifestation. So this is again, echoes of what Baha'u'llah has always said, that the purpose of man's existence is to know and to worship God. And to know God is to know his manifestation at the time that the manifestation reveals himself to humanity, and at the time that is prescribed for his revelation. So during this time, this is the time where the manifestation of God, the supreme manifestation of God, was living, was on his divine throne, so to speak. And therefore, he was there as a judge, that he beckoned his servants to do his bidding. And if they chose not to follow his counsels and directives and admonishments, then he would judge them. And then he would also pass judgment and a divine reprimand and consequences. So this is, again, he's echoing this throughout all his letters to the kings, including the collective summons that he originally made back in 1866 in Surah Muluk, the epistle to the kings. Baha'u'llah continues, he that turneth aside from the true one is indeed the most veiled amongst his creatures. Thus hath it been decreed by him who's the Almighty, the most powerful. He continues, we have also heard that thou hast entrusted the reins of counsel into the hands of the representatives of the people. Thou indeed hast done well, for thereby the foundation of the edifice of thine affairs will be strengthened, and the hearts of all that are beneath thy shadow, whether high or low, will be tranquilized. Now, again, a side note here is that the system of constitutional monarchy had been in effect for several centuries, but it was becoming more and more fine-tuned, and the power of the representation, power of the parliament was becoming greater and greater. Now, but here, Baha'u'llah, I believe, is referring to the British Legislation Reform Bill of 1867, commonly known as the Reform Act of 1867, that enfranchised part of the urban male working class in England and Wales for the first time. Now, prior to this act, only 1 million of the British male could vote, where there were 7 million or 8 million people. So again, before this Parliamentary Representation Act, only 1 million of the 7 million adult men in England and Wales could vote. But after this, the entire population of England and Wales were now eligible, and so they were enfranchised, if you will. But it took place over a couple of years, culminating in the full enactment on the 1st of January 1869, which would have been few weeks before the revelation of the tablet to Queen Victoria. So here Baha'u'llah is echoing again, he's acknowledging what has happened, that now they have full representation, that all the male are at least represented. I mean, the women would get their chance in the 20th century, but at least now you have full male representation in the United Kingdom, which is unprecedented in the world. There's no places on earth had that level of representation at the time. Baha'u'llah continues, then referring to the parliamentary representatives, he says, it behooveth them, however, to be trustworthy among his servants. So he now gives qualification for those who are going to be the member of parliament representing their constituency. So he says, it behooveth them, the parliamentary representatives, however, to be trustworthy among his servants and to regard themselves as the representatives of all that dwell on earth. It's really interesting, not just the representation of your constituency, but representations of all that dwell on earth, meaning having a world-embracing vision. So rather than be just nationalistic. So here Baha'u'llah's globalization paradigm that was very in marked contrast to the age of nationalism. You'll see that. You'll see that in many of the other tablets as well, where he's talking about, for example, in Loha Maqsood, where he talks about the earth is but one country and mankind is citizen. That we have to understand that was so revolutionary and so unprecedented in an age of nationalism, where everybody was focused on making sure that they were well represented, that their nation was well represented in the world stage, and it was all about the patriotism towards the nation, where Baha'u'llah says true patriotism comes to the ones who love and who embrace the whole world. So this was very, very different than the sentiments and the political philosophy of the time. And he continues, and if any one of these representatives, if any one of them directs himself towards the assembly, the parliament, let him turn his eyes unto the supreme horizon and say, so it's a prayer. He says that, when someone goes in there, he must not only be trustworthy and be fair, but here now he reveals a prayer and says, oh my God, I ask thee by thy most glorious name to aid me in that which will cause the affairs of thy servants to prosper and thy cities to flourish. Thou indeed hast power over all things. Beautiful prayer for the representatives of that assembly, members of parliament. Blessed is he, again, he continues, that entereth the assembly, the parliament, for the sake of God, and judges between men with pure justice. So he says, you have to have that perspective that you are the servant of God, you are the servant of the people, and you must act with justice, that you are now the representative of the people for the people, by the people. But in this way, Baha'u'llah enhances that. He says you also have a responsibility to all the peoples of the world, and especially with the British nation, it literally ruled majority of the civilized world. So in a way, it was a responsibility. Baha'u'llah says that your responsibility extends beyond just your nation, but you have also a duty and a responsibility, globally, as the custodians, as the servants of the globe as well, and not only your nation. Now, in the next paragraph, Baha'u'llah addresses directly not only the members of the parliament, but also the elected representatives of people in every land. Now, the asterisks that I have put here, Baha'u'llah actually changes this in the Epistle to the Son of the World, the Epistle to the Son of the Wolf. He slightly changes it. So in this translation, and the Guardian in both translation modifies it. So in this in the Surah Haykal, Baha'u'llah says, "O ye the elected representatives of the people in every land," whereas in the Epistle to the Son of the Wolf, he says, "O ye members of the assemblies in that land and in other countries." So he envisions that this system of constitutional monarchy and parliamentary representation will spread, and which has, we have in Australia, for example, other former colonies, and Canada, we have a very similar system of that constitutional monarchy still, and parliamentary representation. So I just found that to be quite fascinating, that here in the Epistle to the Son of the Wolf, there's a slight difference where Baha'u'llah actually expands that. Now, the first one, let me just go back to the, if I can go back, I may have to escape and go back to the, so in this, he says, okay, one slide further. So I think we went back a little bit too far. So here, going back to okay. So, "O ye the elected representatives of the people in every land." He says, "Take ye counsel together, and let your concern be only for that which profits mankind, and bettereth the condition thereof, if ye be of them that scan heedfully." So he's basically saying that the parliamentary representatives must look beyond their nation, that they must have a world-embracing global vision, even though they are elected to represent their region and their constituency. But he says they must look at the prosperity of not just only the part of society that they represent, but they must look at all of society, of the world, of the entire planet. And here he continues, he says, "Regard the world as the human body, which though at its creation whole and perfect, hath been afflicted through various causes with grave disorders and maladies. Not for one day did it gain ease, nay, its sickness waxed more severe, as it fell under the treatment of ignorant physicians, who gave full rein to their personal desires and have erred grievously." And he continues, and if at one time, through the care of an able physician, a member of that body was healed, the rest remained afflicted as before. Thus informeth you the all-knowing, the all-wise. Then Baha'u'llah makes a general statement where he says, we behold the world, we behold it in this day at the mercy of rulers so drunk with pride that they cannot discern clearly their own best advantage, much less recognize a revelation so bewildering and challenging as this. So this is Baha'u'llah's assessment of, essentially a general assessment of all the rulers and kings and queens of the 19th century, where they were all heedless of what was in their midst, and it passed them by. And then Baha'u'llah continues, and whenever any one of these rulers hath striven to improve its condition, meaning condition of the world, Baha'u'llah says his motive hath been his own gain. So it was self-serving, like Napoleon III, whether confessedly so or not, whether they confessed it, in their policy, or they did not. And he continues, says, and the unworthiness of this motive hath limited his power to heal or cure. So even if he says, oh, I'm going to bring about reforms, for instance, this reminds me of the emancipation of serfs, in Russia. Alexander II was dubbed the Tsar Liberator. He did his policies did liberate the peasants, if you will, but really it was not enough, and they were still disadvantaged. It didn't go far enough, and this is why these revolutionary ferment continued for the next few decades, that eventually led to the Bolshevik Revolution, to communism. In Russia. So as Baha'u'llah says here, some of these reforms are not adequate enough, and they don't go far enough, and they have ulterior motives, and they are not truly sincere. They're really not looking for the best interest. They're just looking for the best interest of the monarch or those certain groups that are in power, not the best interest of the whole world. Baha'u'llah then begins a well-known passage from his writings where he describes himself as a divine physician who has the panacea for all the world's ills. He writes, that which the Lord hath ordained as the sovereign remedy and mightiest instrument for the healing of all the world is the union of all its peoples in one universal cause, one common faith. This is a very well-known passage that we all have read in some shape or form. And it comes from this tablet to Queen Victoria, where the unity of mankind is proclaimed here. So in 1869, in the first quarter of 1869, Baha'u'llah is enunciating this principle that of his revelation, which is a cornerstone of his revelation, is and he says it's the instrument for the healing of the world is the union or unity of all its people in one universal cause, one common faith. And then he continues, this can in no wise be achieved except through the power of a skilled and all-powerful and inspired physician. Basically, he says, I have the key, I have the instructions, the recipe to achieve that. In order to have universal peace, to have prosperity within this planet, within this world, there has to be unity. But the only thing that can unite the world is my instruction, my world order, if you will. I mean, and he expounds on that in other tablets. But here he's talking about, he says, he has the medicine. He's the physician. He knows what to do, and yet he's being prevented and is not allowed to do it, as you will see. And he also says that in many of his tablets as well. So he uses himself as a divine physician and a world reformer. You will see that, and this is in this tablet. So he says this can in no wise be achieved except through the power of a skilled and all-powerful and inspired physician. This verily is the truth, and all else naught but error. Each time that most mighty instrument, again, the manifestation of God, hath come, and that light shone forth from the ancient dayspring, he was withheld by ignorant physicians who even as clouds interposed themselves between him and the world. You know, this conjures the image that, let's say, you have this very skilled modern physicians and versus these witch doctors that still use so outdated and archaic and ineffective, like bloodletting using leeches or something like that. I mean, that really conjures that you have this really poor, physicians that are superstitious, whereas the all-knowing physician, Baha'u'llah, who has all the skill, who's trained, who is trained by God, who has all the skills to help heal the wounds of the world and the sickness of the world, is being prevented because and shunned because he is new, and what he is offering is something novel, something very very new. So he says he was withheld, this physician, by ignorant physicians who even as a cloud, as clouds interposed between themselves, between him and the world. It failed therefore to recover, the world did, and its sickness had persisted until this day and continues. And we see it even today. Because even today, in the 21st century, Baha'u'llah's healing message has not penetrated on a large scale and is not being practiced. Therefore, the world is in where it is today. We see with the wars, with the tragedies that we will see that humanity continually goes through. They indeed were powerless to protect it, to protect the world, those unskilled physicians, or to effect a cure, whilst he who hath been the manifestation of power amongst men was withheld from achieving his purpose by reason of what the hands of the ignorant physicians have wrought. And then Baha'u'llah becomes more specific. Consider these days in which he who is the ancient beauty hath come in the most great name, Baha, that he may quicken the world and unite its peoples. They, however, rose up against him with sharpened swords and committed that which caused the faithful spirit to lament. Until the end, they imprisoned him in the most desolate of cities. So this is a reference to Baha'u'llah being, as he's revealing this, he is cast into the army barracks prison under solitary confinement, probably one of the worst situations that Baha'u'llah was in, next to that of being in the dungeon of Siahchal, that solitary confinement in the army barracks for 2 years, 2.5 years. So, and broke the grasp of the faithful upon the hem of his robe. Were anyone to tell them the world reformer is come, so he refers to himself as the world reformer, they would answer and say, indeed, it is proven that he is a fomenter of discord. This is something that the Ottomans had labeled and through the coercion and the influence of the Persian government, basically that Baha'u'llah's activity was seditious, that he was corrupting the minds of the people, and that he deserved to be imprisoned and withheld and circumscribed and restricted. And that's what they did. They achieved that through the edict of his banishment to Akká. So, and this notwithstanding, Baha'u'llah continues, that they have never associated with him and have perceived that he did not seek for one moment to protect himself. So again, this is, Baha'u'llah says that I had no desire for self-preservation. He says that in the first tablet to Napoleon III. He says, I'm calling you because of the injustice that is happening, not for myself. He says, put me to the sword, kill me, but at least act justly. I will sacrifice myself in the same way that the Blessed Bab sacrificed himself, his very, existence for the cause of reforming the institutions of Islam in Iran and the Middle East. Here, Baha'u'llah on a global scale. And he says, oftentimes, he had never been put before a tribunal. It was so unjustly, he was never examined. Baha'u'llah, constantly yearned and sought with wherever he was that, okay, if you wish, whether it was with religious community or whether it was the political, I said, okay, set up a tribunal, and let's examine our cause and see whether what you claim that where our activities are seditious, whether it's true. And if we are true, then do whatever you want with us. He says that in another tablet, but he says what you have done is so unjust by any standards. So to read that, and this notwithstanding that they have never associated with him and have perceived that he did not seek for one moment to protect himself. At all times, he was at the mercy of the wicked doers. At one time, they cast him into prison. At another, they banished him. And yet another hurried him from land to land. Thus have they pronounced judgment against us, and God truly is aware of what I say. So in a nutshell, Baha'u'llah talks about, his imprisonment in Tehran, then his banishment, and then from there, further banishment from Istanbul to Edirne, and now finally to this penal colony in this remote section of the Ottoman Empire. Now, this last section of paragraph 7 was not translated by The Guardian, and hence it had to be rendered into English by the Baha'i World Center. It reads, such men are reckoned by God, and it talks about those people who have passed judgment against him without any cause or without any evidence. So Baha'u'llah says, such men are reckoned by God among the most ignorant of his creatures. They cut off their own limbs and perceive it not. They deprive themselves of that which is best for them and know it not. Because that which is best for them is the revelation, it's God's guidance for unification of the world, and yet they're refusing that without any investigation, without any type of examination. He continues, they are even as young children. as a young child, who can distinguish neither the mischief maker from the reformer, nor the wicked from the righteous. We behold them in this day wrapped in a palpable veil. In the next 6 paragraphs, paragraphs 8 through 13, most of which has been rendered into English by the beloved Guardian, and this is from the sections in section 119 of the Gleanings, Baha'u'llah addresses the kings and the rulers of the earth collectively. So this is the only tablet in which Baha'u'llah, besides addressing a single monarch, he turns his voice to what he had previously addressed. So he echoes what he had previously, and in great detail and with such eloquent language, had stated in the Epistle to the King, Surah Al-Muluk. And the tone and style of these passages, I have examined the Arabic, almost identical to that of Surah Muluk, the Epistle to the Kings, which was revealed almost 3 years earlier in the summer of 1866 in Edirne. So begins the section now addressing the kings and rulers of the world. Baha'u'llah begins, O ye rulers of the earth, wherefore have ye clouded the radiance of the sun and caused it to cease from shining? Hearken unto the counsel given you by the pen of the Most High, that happily both ye and the poor may attain unto tranquility and peace. We beseech God to assist the kings of the earth to establish peace on earth. He verily doth what he willeth. Now, very interesting, the way Baha'u'llah addresses the kings collectively in 1866. He does it again in 1869, and once more, finally, in the pages of the Kitab Aqdas in 1873. As we will see in the next course, we're going to be examining those passages in the Kitab Aqdas where he also addresses the kings collectively. So he addresses the kings collectively 3 times in 3 different stages. First, the initial seminal stage, then in the stage where he is addressing individual monarchs, the most powerful individual monarchs of the world, and then he kind of wraps it up, and the sort of the culmination of his proclamatory messages to the kings and rulers of the world in the pages of the Kitab Aqdas. He continues, O kings of the earth, we see you increasing every year your expenditures and laying the burden thereof on your subjects. This verily is wholly and grossly unjust. And very similar to what he already wrote in the Surah Muluk. Fear the sighs and tears of this wronged one, and lay not excessive burden on your peoples. Do not rob them to rear palaces for yourselves. This passage conjured the building of the Dolmabahce Palace, which is in Istanbul, which began with Sultan Abdul Majid and continued throughout the reigns of Sultan Abdul Aziz. And it was this extravagant, opulent palace that it's a museum now and Dolmabahce Palace. It just was over the top. Even Queen Victoria, donated or gifted to the Sultan the chandeliers that's in the main hall. It's an absolutely just a colossal, huge, and it was at a time where the treasury of the Ottoman Empire was in the state of bankruptcy. In fact, in 1873, there was a bankruptcy within the Ottoman, and yet they were building this palace. So Baha'u'llah says, do not. And where did that money come from? You know, the taxations overburdening the peasants and the people who really didn't have much to give, and yet they were being sucked out. You know, their any kind of, you know, money that as a result of their livelihood was sucked out by the central government. And it happened in many parts and many nations. So here he says, do not rob them to rear palaces for yourselves, nay, rather choose for them that which you choose for yourselves. They did that in Europe as well. It was not just only, you know, exclusive to the Sultan of Turkey. Nasruddin Shah did it. All these monarchs that Baha'u'llah has addressed individually or collectively were doing this. Thus we unfold to your eyes that which profiteth you, if ye but perceive. Your people are your treasures. Beware lest your rule violate the commandments of God, and ye deliver your wards to the hands of the robber. Wow, very powerful. By them, by whom? By the people. By them ye rule. By their means ye subsist. By their aid ye conquer. Yet how disdainfully you look upon them. How strange, how very strange. He says, your subjects are your trust. You know, you are representative of God. He says that, you know, the kings are the shadow of God on earth. And he says, and they have a responsibility to be just, to rule with justice and equity, and be concerned for the welfare of their people rather than, you know, exploit them and suppress them. And this is why there was such revolutionary and such dissent brewing within the second half of the 19th century, which eventually led to the downfall of all the monarchies by the turn of the 20th century. By the end of the First World War, you know, many of those monarchies were brought down, and including the great Ottoman Empire. So this is Baha'u'llah's warning them, you know, in 1869, the kings, but they did not heed his warning. Now that ye have refused the most great peace, hold ye fast unto this, the lesser peace, that happily ye may in some degree better your own condition and that of your dependents. The most great peace, just again, there's lots to say about it, but we can discuss it. The most great peace is that peace that is under one common faith. Baha'u'llah says one universal faith under God's command completely, that everybody submits to that, everybody unifies. It's a unity in diversity. It's that ultimate global unity. But he says that you have refused it because we called upon you 3 years ago, you didn't do it, and the Bab, you know, did it, you know, in his revelation, and it seems that you're not going there. So at least, you know, establish a lesser peace, which would be the elimination of all wars, that there would be a political unification, at least throughout the world. And that has not really, I mean, fully been realized. It's getting there, but it really hasn't fully realized. So he says, hold ye fast unto this, the lesser peace, that happily ye may in some degree better your own condition and that of your dependents. Then again, he says, he addresses them, O rulers of the earth, be reconciled amongst yourselves, that ye may need no more armaments, save in a measure to safeguard your territories and dominions. Beware lest ye disregard the counsel of the all-knowing, the faithful. I'm sure there's many commentaries about this state. And again, Baha'u'llah continues, be united, O kings of the earth, for thereby will the tempest of discord be stilled amongst you, and your peoples find rest in ye, if ye be of them that comprehend. Should anyone among you take up arms against another, rise ye all against him, for this is not but manifest justice. I think, right now with the current political situation and the war in Ukraine, that this statement of Baha'u'llah rings so true. And I think the world is realizing that they have to unite against an aggressor and an aggressor nation. Now, the remaining portion of paragraph 12 was not translated by the Guardian, and hence it had to be rendered into English. It reads as follows. So paragraph 12, Baha'u'llah says, thus did we exhort you. So he does now refer to the Surah Muluk. Thus did we exhort you in the tablet, Surah Muluk, send down aforetime. And we admonish you once again to follow that which hath been revealed by him, who is the Almighty, the All-Wise. Should anyone seek refuge with you, extend unto him your protection and betray him not. Thus doth the pen of the Most High counsel you as bidden by him who's the all-knowing, the all-informed. Paragraph 13, the last paragraph in which Baha'u'llah addresses the kings of the earth, was also not translated by Shoghi Effendi, and it too had to be rendered into English by the Baha'i World Center. It reads as follows. Beware lest ye act as did the King of Islam, Sultan Abdul Aziz, when we came unto him at his bidding. This is Baha'u'llah's recounting his invitation by the Ottoman central government to leave Baghdad and come to Constantinople, to Istanbul. Then he says his ministers pronounced judgment against us with such injustice that all creation lamented, and the hearts of those who are nigh unto God were consumed. The winds of self and passion move them as they will, and we found them all bereft of constancy. They are indeed of those that are far astray. In paragraph 14, Baha'u'llah redirects his attention back to the Queen. This paragraph in its entirety has been translated into English by the Baha'i World Center, and it's the second last paragraph of the tablet. Baha'u'llah begins the paragraph, rein in thy pen, O pen of the Ancient of Days, and leave them to themselves, for they are immersed in their idle fancies. Who? The kings. Make thou mention of the Queen, that she may turn with a pure heart unto the scene of transcendent glory, may withhold not her eyes from gazing toward her Lord, the Supreme Ordainer, and may become acquainted with that which hath been revealed in the books and tablets by the Creator of all mankind, he through whom the sun hath been darkened and the moon eclipsed, and through whom the caul hath been raised betwixt earth and heaven. In paragraph 15, the last of the last paragraph of the tablet, which has been translated in its entirety by Shoghi Effendi and included in Promised Days Come, Baha'u'llah reveals a special prayer for Queen Victoria to recite during her communion with God. It begins, Baha'u'llah says, turn thou unto God and say, O my sovereign Lord, I am but a vassal of thine, and thou art in truth the King of kings. I have lifted my suppliant hands unto the heaven of thy grace and thy bounties. Send down then upon me from the clouds of thy generosity, that which will rid me of all save thee, and draw me nigh unto thyself. I beseech thee, O my Lord, by thy name, which thou hast made the King of names, and the manifestations of thyself to all who are in heaven and on earth, to rend asunder the veils that have intervened between me and my recognition of the dawning place of thy signs and the day spring of thy revelation. Thou art verily the Almighty, the all-powerful, the all-bounteous. Deprive me not, O my Lord, of the fragrances of the robe of thy mercy in thy days, and write down for me that which thou hast written down for thy handmaidens who have believed in thee and in thy signs, and have recognized thee and set their hearts towards the horizon of thy cause. Thou art truly the Lord of the worlds, and of those who show mercy the most merciful. Assist me then, O my God, to remember thee amongst thy handmaidens, and to aid thy cause in thy lands. Accept then that which hath escaped me when the light of thy countenance shone forth. Thou indeed hast power over all things. Glory be to thee, O thou, in whose hand is the kingdom of the heavens and of the earth. That ended the tablet. This is just a photograph that I thought to bring in. This is around when this tablet was revealed. This is what Queen Victoria looked like. This photo was taken circa 1870, so just within a year of the revelation of this tablet. Also, the family of Queen Victoria, they had 9 children. 9. Interesting, they could have started a Baha'i assembly, just the kids themselves. You'll see Prince Albert. Unfortunately, Prince Albert passed prematurely. I believe it was tuberculosis in 1861, in December, early December of 1861. This was absolutely devastating for Queen Victoria. She went into mourning for years and became very melancholic as a result of losing her husband, who she adored, and who was also a great supporter of her reign, and was a cause of great deal of promotion of the monarchy. So you'll see the eldest of the children, which is a lady you see on to the left of the photo. She her name escapes me at this moment, but she became the empress, or the queen to Emperor Frederick, who unfortunately didn't live very long, of Prussia and later Germany, and was the mother of King Wilhelm II, the Kaiser of the First World War, if you will. And so the Kaiser was the grandson of Queen Victoria, and many other, as I said to you, minor kings of Europe as well. You also know that one of Queen Victoria's granddaughters was Queen Mary of Romania, who became a Baha'i, and so that was it was through one of her sons, I believe. Again, it's been a while since I have looked at the genealogy of the family, but very, very fascinating, and there's been a lot of books written on that, how the political scene, if you will, of Europe, particularly at the end of the 19th century, more towards the beginning of the 20th century, was dominated by family relationships between various kingdoms and monarchies. Now, about the transmission and response to Baha'u'llah's tablet to Queen Victoria, there is actually no direct historical evidence that has come to light so far that shows when and how Baha'u'llah's tablet to Queen Victoria was delivered to its recipient. Now, the only recorded evidence that we have that implies the tablet did reach its intended destination is the statement by Shoghi Effendi, where he writes in The Promised Days Come, Queen Victoria, it is said, upon reading the tablet revealed for her, remarked, if this is of God, it will endure. If not, it can do no harm. This statement, many Baha'is have taken it as to be a very positive and supportive. It is not. And as you will see, Baha'u'llah actually considers Queen Victoria in another tablet, which I will share with you, as wayward, as someone who had been heedless of the call. So she may have responded in a more of a neutral way, but certainly was not a positive way. And I think her monarchy or her family continued, not because of what she did or she did not do. I think because the system of parliamentary government, which England had adopted, is the system that, according to Baha'u'llah, according to God, is the most favored of all the political models, if you will, in the world. And because in one other tablet, Baha'u'llah says that God loves the institution of kingship and monarchy and does not want the world to be deprived of it. But at the same time, it also wants a parliamentary system of representation. So that kind of like the democracy. So he says combining the two is what brings it to its full glory, and it will be effective. So that's his take. So I don't believe that Queen Victoria, I mean, certainly Queen Victoria was not arrogant enough like Napoleon to throw away the tablet. So she just said, hey, who is this guy? I mean, if he's from God, then his cause will flourish. If not, it's not going to do us any harm. I mean, what is he going to do? What is a prisoner in the army barracks of in Akká, in basically a nowhere place in the Middle East can do us harm. So in a way, that's how I read this statement. But anyways, now considering the restrictions that were in effect at the time when Baha'u'llah revealed the tablet to Queen Victoria, one can only assume that the task of delivering the tablet to the British monarch had to be undertaken through an influential British national in the Middle East who would have also had to be friendly and sympathetic to Baha'u'llah and his cause. The only person that would fit these criteria was an individual, a very well-known British politician and a soldier, Colonel Sir Arnold B. Campbell. Now, I'll tell you a little bit about him. This is actually a photo of Sir Arnold Burroughs Campbell, taken on 6th of December, 1860, while he was the British Consul General in Baghdad. So this is around the time where Baha'u'llah was in Baghdad. A.B. Campbell was the British Consul General in Baghdad. Now, about him, very interesting man. He was born in Mumbai in British India in 1820 and died in London, England in 1908. So he lived a fairly full life and had an illustrious career by British standards, if you will. He was both a soldier and a foreign diplomat in the British service. He was knighted and also reached the rank of general in the British Army. I mean, he went through the ranks, but he was involved in many wars, and in fact, the Anglo-Persian War he was involved with some of the Turks. He was brilliant. He was apparently fluent in Arabic, Persian, and Turkish, and among many important posts he held in his eventful career, he was the British Consul General in Baghdad from 1859. He was actually in Baghdad earlier, and he has sent report, but he became the official Consul General in 1859, and his tenure lasted till 1874. So he was there for 15 years. Now, from 1859 to 1863, those years were coincided with the latter years of Baha'u'llah's sojourn in Baghdad. He was also such a prominent individual that in 1873, he was appointed official attendant to Nasiruddin Shah on Nasiruddin Shah's first visit to England. So because he probably spoke, not probably, but did speak Persian, and he knew the Middle East well. So the British Foreign Office, while he was still the Consul General in Baghdad, they gave him this task to accompany the Shah of Iran on his first European trip to Europe, and eventually to England, which he met with Queen Victoria as well. Queen Victoria was not a big fan of Nasiruddin Shah. In fact, in her memoirs, she writes that she despised him and found him to be very uncouth and, just not a very good person. So that's the vibe that Queen Victoria had got from Nasiruddin Shah, which I don't blame her. He was a sinister individual, the prince of oppressors, Baha'u'llah calls him. Anyways, so and the way I believe this is also a clue that we have in Shoghi Effendi's assessment, which apparently comes from Baha'u'llah. So in God Passes By, in the second chapter on Baha'u'llah's banishment to Iraq, Shoghi Effendi writes, nor was the then representative of the British government, Colonel Sir Arnold Burroughs Campbell, Consul General in Baghdad, insensible of the position which Baha'u'llah now occupied. This is where the Guardian is kind of making an assessment of Baha'u'llah's fame and prestige that had become known during his last few years of Baha'u'llah's sojourn in Baghdad, entering into friendly correspondence with him. So the Guardian says that there was correspondence between Baha'u'llah and Campbell, as testified by Baha'u'llah himself. And Baha'u'llah says that, now I have not seen that tablet. The Guardian says it exists, so it does exist. It's probably somewhere in the archives of the International Baha'i archives in Haifa, but it certainly hasn't been published, or at least I have not seen it. And he says Baha'u'llah has testified that Campbell offered him the protection of the British citizenship, called on him in person, so he had met Baha'u'llah in person, and undertook to transmit to Queen Victoria any communication he might wish to forward to her. So he had offered it. So he had become very friendly with Baha'u'llah, had respected Baha'u'llah. In fact, in Mujan Momin's book, Some Contemporary Western Accounts, there's few letters that Arnold Campbell wrote to the British foreign minister, reporting of the situation of Baha'u'llah. And he spoke very respectfully of Baha'u'llah, and when there was a criticism about Baha'u'llah taking citizenship, the Ottoman citizenship, he defended that, that position that Baha'u'llah had no other choice. In fact, as you see that Baha'u'llah was offered by him British citizenship, but Baha'u'llah chose to go with the Ottoman citizenship. So he says, and then he had said, if there's anything you want to communicate to Queen Victoria. So I suspect because of this offer that he had made earlier while Baha'u'llah was in Baghdad, Baha'u'llah may have taken him on that when he revealed the tablet to Queen Victoria in Akká, which would have been very difficult to transmit while he was confined in the army barracks, like the tablet to Napoleon III. It probably would have had to have been, secretly snuck out by some means, and may have been sent to Arnold Burroughs Campbell. But there is no record of it. So, and I know Baha'u'llah wanted it to be kept secretive, especially until it arrived, so it would not be, intercepted by others. If people knew about it, they would have made an effort. The governments would have, especially the government of Turkey the Ottomans would have made an attempt to prevent the transmission of that. So there's no papers that we have of Arnold, unlike Gobineau, where he kept his correspondence with Baha'u'llah regarding the first and second tablet. Well, actually, the first tablet to Napoleon III. But we don't have any historical evidence as of yet. Now, it may come to light down the road, but all signs point to Campbell as being the channel by which this was transferred to Queen Victoria, and also received a response. So he was obviously a prominent British subject, so he would have probably delivered it himself, I would think. He even expressed, the Guardian goes on, so he even expressed his readiness to arrange for the transfer of Baha'u'llah's residence to India, which was under British rule, or to any place agreeable to him within the British Commonwealth, within the British Empire. This suggestion Baha'u'llah declined, choosing to abide in the dominions of the Sultan of Turkey. So that's on page 131 of God Passes By. So from this information provided by Shoghi Effendi, one could surmise that Colonel Sir A.B. Campbell was the channel through which Baha'u'llah's tablet to Queen Victoria was transmitted to the British monarch, but we don't know that for certain. To close the presentation here, I wanted to share with you, there's an excerpt from a tablet of Baha'u'llah about which he mentions Queen Victoria and has not been translated. So in an as yet untranslated tablet addressed to one of the women believers in the family of the Hand of the Cause of God, Ibn Astaq, Baha'u'llah writes, "Through the grace of God, thou hast attained unto such a station that transcends the station of all the queens on earth. The Queen of London attends church every day in the name of God and believes that she is worshiping the one true God, notwithstanding that the one true God hath testified and is testifying unto her waywardness, for she is deprived of recognizing him, even though she is holding fast unto his name. Regrettably, other emperors of the world are also the same." This is in Peke Rostan, for those who read Persian. It's actually in Persian. Part of it is in Arabic, but it's in Persian, page 207. Okay, this brings us to the end. I know it was a long presentation. Thank you for your patience. And this ends our 5th webinar and the series of webinars for this course. And I will now like to invite Dr. Stockman to join us. And so we could, if there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, Shahrokh. It was fascinating and full of details, especially with this information at the end about Mr. Kemble,
Yes.
which is quite an interesting suggestion. I wonder, regarding Mr. Kemble, that this information Shoghi Effendi has about Baha'u'llah corresponding with him and his offers might very well just be oral communication from Abul Baha. So
Yes.
there might not necessarily be any documentation that will be found in the future, because we don't know for sure all those letters have survived. If they've survived, though, certainly, then those will be quite interesting.
Yes, I tend to agree with you. I think, we have to understand that Abdul Baha was there, and Abdul Baha shared every detail about the revelation with the Guardian as he was growing up. So this is again, and also the response from the Queen. There's no document. We're just going by what Shoghi Effendi has shared, and I believe it's the truth, obviously. But from an academic historical point of view, we don't have it. It's still somewhat hearsay. There is actually no documentation.
Right, but he also would be the obvious choice for translating it into English.
Yes.
Since he knew Persian well. So that would be another aspect of this whole question.
Yes.
Is also resolved.
Yes.
Which is quite interesting. A couple of comments. Doug Lador notes, I'm not aware of any ruler throughout history that paid any attention to anyone telling them how to spend their money, even when their people were being taxed heavily. If they won't listen to God or his manifestations, history repeats itself.
Exactly.
Certainly
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah,
I couldn't agree more. It's madness. It's insanity that this type of history keeps repeating itself, and humanity doesn't learn. I think it's tragic. It's tragic, but well, certainly now the divine retribution and the consequences for humanity, we're witnessing it. It's graphically being manifested in the lives, and everybody's lives are being impacted by it, in some shape or form. So
yeah, very much so. Very much so. Well, we have the usual phenomenon. Anyone who is in charge of something quite strongly eventually becomes quite confident in their own abilities.
Yes.
And is not interested in listening to anybody else's point of view. And the more power they have, the less likely they are to listen to others, as we've seen repeatedly in many examples, I'm afraid.
It reminds me of that statement by Lord Acton that says power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Yeah. So you see that whether it's totalitarian regimes, whether it's oligarchy, whatever system that is beyond that system of democracy, true democracy here, where Baha'u'llah is promoting the representation that tends to be very parochial and tends to become very corrupt.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Marco notes that the oldest daughter of Victoria was also named Victoria.
Victoria, I think I wasn't 100% sure, but
it's quite interesting. And he asks if you can type the name of the palace in Istanbul so that we have the exact spelling of it.
You can actually, if you Google it, it's Dolmabahce. It's a Dolmabahce. So if you just Google that, even with the wrong spelling, it will come out. It's this white palace on the Bosphorus that is just. Mustafa Kemal Ataturk spent the last few years of his life actually moved in there, and lived in that. But it's just a massive, massive palace. I mean, it's really a museum. I mean, the marble, the alabasters, the stuff that was used so extravagant and so excessive. And it took years for it to be completed, and they were running out of, even the the prime ministers had issues with it, the Turkish prime ministers, because it was the cost overruns were just so horrendous. But the Sultan wanted to get it done, and so it took two sultans to complete it. And the interesting, that I think by the time it was finished, it was towards the end of Abdul Aziz's reign, and the Sultan never moved in. And later on, Abdul Hamid II, that long reigning Sultan, he actually went to Yildiz, which was another palace. So no Sultan, I don't think, occupied it for a very long time. And so it became the symbol of, extravagance, and I haven't seen it. I would love to go see it. If I go to Istanbul one of these years, I would definitely be on my to-do list.
I would think you'd want to compare it to Versailles, because I'm sure they wanted to compare it to Versailles.
Yes, I think so too. I've seen Versailles. Versailles is just again, it's amazing. But yeah, I think this was it. I think the sultans, they wanted to prove themselves that they were part of Europe, and that they had this wonderful empire, and that I think they through their spending, through their extravagance, they wanted to prove themselves to the rest of the European nations, I think, which never worked,
Yeah. Well, yeah, people will always, if they do that, they'll just simply say, well, they're nouveau riche.
Yes. Exactly.
Old man of Europe and nouveau riche.
Yes.
All accusing of opposite things at the same time.
I think one thing is that if the later governments of the Ottomans, even the Sultan Abdul Hamid, if they could have sold that, I mean, if it was something that was sellable, they would have sold it, because the treasury was completely bankrupt by the 1870s and 1880s, and it was very difficult. And then get to have this palace of such extravagance, sitting there.
Acres of roof to maintain.
Exactly. Yeah.
The most expensive part of any building is maintaining the darn roof.
That's right.
Marco asks, was the abolition of slavery a moral act or a natural consequence of the Second Industrial Revolution? Because machines obviously replace human beings.
I believe it was a moral act. I think it began the movement. For example, William Wilberforce himself, what became, I know he was a politician, but he was also a man of cloth. I think he became, I don't know, but if you look at his, I think he was he became an evangelical minister, and they tried very hard in the latter part of the 18th century. I mean, obviously, because they had seen the horrors of it. I mean, and I mean, any human beings, any civilized human beings would have felt the sensitivity that just because of the color of the skin of these people, of the Africans, they were no less than a human being than the British, who were white.
Right.
But it was a tremendous tragedy. I'd seen when I have traveled to West Africa, to Ghana particularly, because it was from the Gold Coast where it all initiated with the Portuguese and the Dutch and the British. And I've been to some of these slave castles, and it's very moving. It's tremendous. It's such tragedy to see. And so it certainly was a right step in the right direction for the British to kind of pioneer that. Yeah.
I mean, it goes back actually beyond Wilberforce to the Quakers. The Quakers, as early as I think I'm not sure about the late 1600s, but certainly by the early 1700s, were beginning to have this fierce debate about the morality of slavery. And a large number of the owners of plantations on the Barbados were Quakers. And within a few decades, they all sold their plantations and left because they decided it was immoral to own slaves. They didn't free their slaves; they sold their slaves to someone else, and left with their money. But then, of course, the Quakers were leading advocates of abolitionism in the United States up to before the Civil War. So certainly there was a very strong moral push amongst some people to abolish slavery as late as early as the mid 1700s, I would say.
Yes, I think so. But I think the Abolition Act of 1833 set a global precedence that later on, I think it resonated with the American abolitionists as well. And I think this is where you'll see that the next 2 decades after that gains momentum, and the Americans didn't want to be, they didn't want to be behind the British, and from even the sense of pride of it. But it was a very difficult one because, it divided the country and led to the Civil War. And but the 13th Amendment. Now, the 13th Amendment, I believe it was after the Civil War. It was not. It was not prior.
It was. I don't know, 65,
65. Yeah, I think 65, something, 1865. And
I've been listening to the oral version of the book Team of Rivals about Abraham Lincoln and his cabinet. And Lincoln's position all the way through the war was that it was illegal, it was unconstitutional to abolish slavery in the country because it's in the Constitution.
Yes.
He maintained that he could do the Emancipation Proclamation and free the slaves in the rebellious territories as an act of military control, because the slaves were being used by the rebels in their effort to defeat the federal government. So this was very interesting. Lincoln's legal argument was that he's a lawyer. His legal argument was, I can abolish the slavery in the South because they've rebelled, but I can't abolish slavery in Maryland or in Kentucky or in Missouri, which were border states which had slaves which had remained in the Union. They did abolish it in Washington, D.C., because that's federal territory.
Yeah.
That was an interesting argument. And it's also interesting to note that the French had abolished slavery in France, but not in their colonies.
Colonies, yes.
So when Thomas Jefferson was the American representative to France immediately after the Revolution, he brought with him Sally Hemings and 1 or 2 other African slaves. And technically, while they were in Paris, they could have demanded freedom because there was no slavery in Paris. And this actually, some people think, was one of the reasons Sally Hemings, when she went back to the United States with Jefferson as his concubine, they had a bunch of children together. She was in the position to say, look, I won't come back to the United States with you unless you agree to free all my children. And so he treated her as a kind of substitute wife the rest of her life and freed her children.
Interesting.
Which is quite interesting. There's another oral book that I listened to recently. But regarding this whole subject of slavery and the relationship with the Industrial Revolution, I think it's the printing press and the spread of literacy, which then allowed the spread of voting, which allowed the creation of a spread of human rights that create the cultural conditions for abolishing slavery ultimately.
I think so.
Well, you could even say that it is the Industrial Revolution in an indirect sense.
Yes.
Because it created a whole new culture where people no longer had to stay on their farms and work on their farms the rest of their lives. They could move, they could learn to read and write, they could pursue careers, they could demand changes in their government. And this created a concept of human rights and of the individual and the capacity of individuals, which inevitably led to the abolition of slavery. As one person, as Mitra says, I believe the industrial age came about to replace the slave, similar to our digital age to replace paid labor. And that's very true, too.
Yes.
Another question I have, you mentioned the duplication of parts of this tablet with other tablets, but parts of it appearing elsewhere. What percentage of the tablet would you say is available either in the Surah Muluk, or where else did you say it was in?
Oh, in Epistle to the Son of the Wolf, Baha'u'llah quotes large sections of it, the same way he does with the the second tablet to Napoleon III, and parts of tablet to the Tsar as well, as kind of samples to show, Al-Najafi, that he did, he has done these, and but it's the same. I mean, it's for all intents and purposes, Baha'u'llah is quoting. It's just that I found that one section, the addressees, he has enhanced it. He has actually, because if you look at the original is, and the Guardian translates it absolutely faithfully to the original in the Surah Haykal. But with the Epistle to the Son of the Wolf, Baha'u'llah chooses to add other countries, in every land and other countries. So it's not just addressing the parliamentary members of Britain. It is the parliamentary representatives of all nations, present and future, basically, at the time, because at that time that was the only, but he anticipates that there will be more. So even now, the members of the parliaments within Canada and Australia and New Zealand and many of the other, they would be duty bound to do the same thing that God is asking them. That doesn't expire. This is actually a guidance, for them, and it applies even today as much as it did, 140 plus years ago.
Sure. Yeah. I have another question for you. What would you assess the overall tone of the tablet to be, and compared to Napoleon III's first and second tones for tablets, for example, where one was meek and the other one was harsh?
I think this is in the same line as the second tablet, and also the tablet to the Tsar and the Surah Muluk, very much. I think it's the same. I mean, obviously, Baha'u'llah is showing, tremendous courtesy to these monarchs, but, especially to Queen, but he doesn't pull any punches, and you see that about, when he addresses the kings. He says, even though it's been 3 years, he says, you still haven't done anything. You still are, idle. You still are wrapped in your own, willful ignorance and, and in your sort of selfishness, self-aggrandizement, and so on. And then he turns to Queen Victoria and says, well, you could be this great model, as your nation has been a model. I mean, he reveals this really moving prayer, which the Guardian has translated in full, which is at the end of the tablet. And I think it shows that Baha'u'llah had a lot of hopes for the Queen. And I think her response was very, very, very muted.
Lukewarm. Yeah.
Yeah. Lukewarm at best, very, so, and again, and why I shared with you that tablet, and he uses the word kaflat, which means, and the Guardian has translated it as heedlessness, waywardness, that she is, in her waywardness, because she hasn't recognized. He says she goes to church every day and prays, because Queen Victoria used to do that, and as being the head of the Church of England. Yeah. But, he says that she is, she's deluded, in a way. She's wayward by the fact that she hasn't really recognized. Here's this tablet. So this tablet, 1869, revealed, and that tablet was probably in the 1870s and 80s that was revealed to one of the members of the family of. And there are many references that Baha'u'llah, when he encourages or he's trying to uplift many of the handmaidens, many of the women believers, you see that he compares them to the queens, and he says many of these queens are deprived, and you have attained to that high station. Abdul Baha uses that too, when dealing with some of the ladies, because I think ultimately the supreme position that a woman could occupy in this world and on a material basis is to be a queen of a nation. And yet Baha'u'llah says that, those queens, if they knew it, they would be envious of your station because you have attained to true salvation. They have not.
Yeah. Well, we've run out of questions, and actually there's another appointment on this particular channel in about 4 minutes.
Okay.
Well,
yes, it's been a long one. Yes.
Thank you so much, Shahrokh. This was fascinating and very illuminating, and very interesting ideas about how the Queen would have received the tablet, and of course illuminating about the content of the text and the meaning of the text as well, and its history and its overall the tone and such. So thank you so much, and thank you for this entire series, and we look forward to the second series of God Summons Europe in the fall, when we will cover Pope Pius IX, Archbishop Ferdinand, or whoever is the head of the Austro-Hungarian Empire.
He's Franz Joseph Habsburg. Yes, and then Wilhelm, and all the proclamations in the Kitab Aqdas will be covered, and so we'll definitely be we have more to cover.
We've got more tablets to proclamatory tablets to kings and rulers to come, and we look forward to that in the fall. So thank you again, and we look forward to that, and thank you everybody for joining us today.